Welcome to the Once and Future Authors Podcast. I'm Stephanie, and I'm so excited today to be joined by, well, he's a repeat author at this point with me. I think I've been there through this whole series. Wayne Turmel is the author of Johnny Lycan and The Last Witchfinder. And the author writes, a mysterious figure stalks Chicago's paranormal community, and the only person who could stop it is Johnny Loophole, the werewolf PI. First, he must cope with a 400-year-old witchfinder, rampaging demons, and a journalist threatening to reveal Johnny's dark, hairy secret. And if that's not enough, his boss has been kidnapped and the clock is ticking. Packed with non-stop action, humor, and twists, Johnny Lycan in The Last Witchfinder will keep you on the edge of your seat from start to finish. Don't miss the heart-stopping conclusion to the Werewolf PI series. I'm so excited to be joined by our author, Wayne Turmel. Thanks for joining me.
Well, thank you for having me.
And we're
It's
finally
a
up to
fun.
book three. This is exciting.
Yeah, well, it is exciting. It's it's the end of the
A
series
dramatic
essentially.
conclusion.
Dramatic conclusion. I was listening to that description. I'm going, wow, this must be good.
You
Um,
you wrote that. You wrote that.
yeah, but doesn't mean I remember. This is the problem when you write a book is by the time you write it and put it to bed and take your hands off it, it can still be 9 months or more before it comes
That's
out into the world. And okay, and people
that's
say, "Oh, this part here," and I go, "Oh, did I say that? I guess I
no,
did."
I get that because you're rather prolific, so I wouldn't be surprised at all if you're not halfway through the next one already.
Sadly, um, I kind of hit the brakes when I got giant. I'm seriesed out, and
I get
so
get
I that was that. And then I actually have taken most of the last year and been playing with screenplays. I wrote a horror film, and there is a script for Johnny Lycan, Werewolf PI, based on the first book. If anybody ever decides to
Hey,
take a look at it,
anybody who needs a good screenplay, we got it here.
exactly. So I've been doing that and working on short stories. I may do an anthology shortly. So I've been doing stuff, just not novel stuff.
Gotcha. Well, I'm going to grab some of those short stories for our anthology series here. So we'll talk.
Don't make promises you can't keep.
Oh, believe me, one. Believe me, I'm going to keep this one. I am curious though. You said that you're all seriesed out, and I love your honesty with that. Tell me what that means to you, because hundreds of author interviews later, and hundreds and hundreds of author interviews that I've been
Sure.
privileged to do, nobody has ever said that phrase. So
It's funny. I'm seriesed out as both a writer and a reader. As a writer, I I have literary ADD. It's like my first three books were historical fiction, and then I took this weird left turn into urban fantasy, which has been great. I love Johnny. I love the characters. It was a somewhat cynical decision because series sell, and from a purely marketing standpoint. Uh, but three stories is plenty. Thank you. I have other things I want to do.
a
Uh,
trilogy.
as a as a reader, I'm getting really real. I just want to pick up a book and read the book and the story's over. And because I tend to read a lot of urban fantasy and epic fantasy and stuff like that, everything's and at some point I go, and does this guy, it's like Lord of the Rings. Does Frodo ever get rid of the freaking ring? I'm three books in, I'm exhausted, and there's no end in sight. And I don't want to read five books by the same author in a row.
I get that. I get that. And you put it so well, because I'm sure while you were the first person to ever say it to me, I'm sure that our listeners right now are saying, I feel the same way.
Now, the problem is it's a catch 22 for writers, and you help writers get their babies out into the world. So, it's hard for a standalone book,
It's
especially by an author that people don't know. It can be the greatest book in the world, but
how do you get people to read it?
how do you get people to read it? And so there is a logic to series. There is a logic to staying in your genre lane. There is, I think when I wrote Johnny Lycan, the first one, the Anubis Disk, I said to you, I was worried about screwing up my brand by changing genres, but what am I going to annoy both readers? You know, it's not like there's a giant publishing house with the farm bet on me, right?
No. But certainly you're right. It is so hard for a first time author of a standalone novel to just make any sort of a dent. It's rough. It's rough.
It is. And even, I mean, one of my favorite things, and this is literally, authors, listen to me. It is literally the least efficient way to sell books is to sit at a table with your little book going, please buy me. And I love doing it. I love it. I love being at book fairs or, being at a bookstore and talking to people. But when you only have one book, it is statistically unlikely that you're going to sell a lot of them, because even if it's a place where readers come, and most of the time you're not, right? You're set up somewhere else. You're at a place where readers come. People tend to read what they read. And so you might have the best modern romance novel ever written. It's highly unlikely that that's going to catch my attention.
Right.
At least now I've got my rack with 6 novels on it. And when I say, what do you normally read? I'm not going to sell Johnny Lycan to somebody who reads historical and literary fiction.
Right.
But let me direct you over here.
Exactly. Exactly. And now that you've kind of paid your dues with all of that, being a standalone writer, I think you got all the benefit of the series with your next standalone novel, whatever that might be.
I've got my little newsletter list of people who tolerate me and bless the heavens have stuck with me, and some of them have stuck with me through all of it, and some of it are new to me. But I'm hoping that by now they trust me as a writer.
Right.
And if I take the time to put this on paper and put it out in the world, that it'll be a good use of your time as a reader. But it takes a while to do that.
It does. No, it really does. And that's why to do all of that, building up an audience, establishing trust with your reader, all of that for one standalone book from a new author is really hard.
It is. And I mean, it's hard selling books.
It is.
It is. It's a stupid thing to try to do. If I can just, if you're writing books to get rich, you're in entirely the wrong game.
Somebody definitely gave you the wrong information.
Well, we were lied to. When I was a kid and I would see writers on movies or TV shows, they went on these fabulous nationwide book tours and they lived in country houses with huge libraries. And it's all lies. It's all complete nonsense.
Well, you know what the thing is? Some of them do that. I mean, there are the J.K. Rowlings of the world who have a country house. But I am constantly telling people that it's kind of like me and golf. Do you golf? I've never asked you.
Oh, God, no.
Okay. I should say that I don't golf because I'm just atrocious. But I do enjoy the game. And once a year, I will play it, which means that I'm terrible.
Right.
I have bought clubs. I have bought shoes. I have paid for green fees. I have spent so much money on my golf game. But fortunately, with golf, I was never under any delusion, even though I can name people who are making millions of dollars playing golf. I was never under any delusion that I was going to be one of those people.
Right.
But yet we're somehow thinking that we are the next big author who's going to have the country house.
Well, I don't know if you ever saw The Big Chill, as Jeff Goldblum's character said, I don't know anybody who doesn't get out of bed without a couple of big juicy rationalizations. Right. So we do lie to ourselves, but the reality is, and I tell this to new authors all the time, and I'm not trying to pick the wings off flies just to see the horrible look on their face, but picture Amazon, just the book department, as a physical bookstore. And there are 14 million, I think, ish
Something like that.
titles available on Amazon. So even if they have one copy of each, there's 14 million books in this big bookstore. And you write a book, and somebody comes into the store, what are the odds that they are going to find your book? And that's what you're up against.
It is, it is. And then even if they find it, if they find that needle in a haystack,
Right.
that they're going to buy it, because that's where that whole trust and reputation, and that's why I said
Sure.
now, if I picked your next book off of a shelf and I said, never heard of this guy, but I flip it over, I say, oh, he wrote a lot of stuff. And we all think it's social proof. He must be good at it.
Right. You know, and I know that the barriers to actually getting a book out into the world are very low.
No, but we all think that, don't we? He wrote
We do.
He must
We
be
do.
good at it.
You know, I write nonfiction as well. I write business fiction for my business, and there is no better calling card than a book.
Absolutely.
The minute you can say, I literally wrote the book on this, you have a credibility that you may or may not deserve, but by God, he's got a book.
Exactly. I always use the example, if you're at a business conference and you have a choice of which speaker to listen to, and they have
Absolutely.
bios, and one of them says they're the author of something, I'm going to that room. He must be the one who knows what he's talking about. They wrote a book
Sure.
about it. You know, it definitely is that instant credibility. Going back to my golf game, I have really, really a beautiful set of clubs. I have to admit, I did not pay for them. My brother, who is a real golfer, bought me the clubs years ago. The clubs deserve a better person than me. So as I'm taking them out of the trunk, I actually get a crowd. They start looking at me like, oh, look at those clubs. She's good. Of course, the second I take my first swing, they're all back in the clubhouse. But
In the parking lot, you're a star.
I am. I actually have thought about just driving around with the clubs in the back of the cart, because I'm much better when I don't actually take a club out of the bag. I should just smile next to them.
There you go. See?
Credibility. Instant credibility. That's what we were just talking
Human beings are so gullible. God love them.
They are. They are. If you look good, and I got to tell you, you with all your novels, you're looking good. But I know, because I'm fortunate enough to know you and know your books, and you send me sample copies, so I know that you actually, these are books that you should be reading, and that's what I want to talk about, because you are actually delivering the goods, which is amazing, because
Thank you.
you're jumping through different genres here.
Yeah, well, you live in my brain for a while and try to stay on track. You know, it's not going to happen.
It makes
quite
me
frankly.
wonder what's next. Erotica? I mean, where are we going?
No, because I believe in write what you know. So that's not going to happen. I have been waiting 20 years to use
Waiting
that
to
joke.
say that. You've been waiting. And I walked right into it, didn't I?
You did indeed.
I did. I walked right into that one.
Yeah. It's funny though, because I do write short fiction, and some of it has been published and even nominated for a Pushcart Prize. I'm very fortunate. But I use my short fiction as a way of trying different things, different genres, things that, the notion of writing a full-fledged romance novel fills me with terror, but I can write a short story that has a love story in it.
Gotcha.
And so I can try things in short fiction that I would never attempt to do in a novel.
Right. And people like me who have a very short attention span love short stories.
Yeah, I mean, it is a different art form. It is not the same thing. Not everybody who can do one can do the other.
Absolutely not. Absolutely.
Um, but I grew up on short stories, particular horror fiction. I loved short stories. People like Ramsey Campbell and Robert Bloch and the magazines that had
The stories.
the
Yes.
short stories in them. I loved that stuff.
Ah,
And so
lost all.
I, yeah, short fiction is a good outlet and it's a good laboratory.
Absolutely.
You
Absolutely.
know, I went through a phase, I had probably half a dozen stories all themed around boxing. I'm a big boxing fan. And there's not a huge market for boxing fiction out in the world. There used to be. Hemingway got to start writing that stuff. Um, but what I found was, and this is getting really writery and geeky, so feel free to shut me up. It's a prescribed amount of time in a prescribed space, and how do you fill that and make that action work? So a boxing round is 3 minutes. The setting is inside the ring, and you've got 3 minutes to take it from the beginning of the round to the end. And that's a discipline, right? How do you write that? How do you capture the action and make it realistic? How do you frame the story when there's nothing outside of that ring? It was a really, really good way to learn how to write things like fight scenes, which in Johnny Lycan is really important, right? So I use it as a kind of laboratory
Gotcha.
to then put into my novels.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Well, let's talk about Johnny Lycan for a moment.
Okay.
Before we even talk about the full scope,
Yeah.
did you know? Because this is a trilogy, and you say the end of this is the final chapter. Did you know when you started? 3 books? Did you have an outline? Tell me about
I
that.
knew it was a series.
You knew it was a series. Did you know it was
It
3?
was clearly a series. And series had to be at least 3.
Right.
I wrote a series of 2 books unintentionally with my historical fiction. Um, I written Acre's Bastard, and then I wrote the sequel, Acre's Orphans, and then the notion of writing a third book that nobody was going to read uh, didn't seem like a good investment of time. So when I set out to write Johnny, I very intentionally said this is going to be a series,
Okay.
and this is kind of how this works. And it can end it. I mean, when I say it's the end, it is the end of this story arc. It could conceivably someday be more. And in the third book, there is a character who I think is the logical place, if I continue a spinoff, um, is kind of the logical character to pick that up. So I planned out that there was going to be a series. And I knew the first book, and I knew at the end of, there were certain things I had to do to stick the landing. And I'm not going to give spoilers.
No, no.
If anybody cares, they have to read the book, darn it. Um,
3 books.
but to stick the landing, there were certain things that had to happen. And they weren't going to happen after book 2. And after book 3, and the notion of writing a book 4 just filled me with dread. And I went, you know what? I think Johnny needs a break, and here's the logical place to end that.
Gotcha.
There are doors open, there are
Okay.
potential things in the future, but George R.R. Martin scarred a lot of people for life. I mean, they are going to go to their graves waiting for the end of the Game of Thrones saga. And especially with new authors, a lot of people aren't even going to start a series if they know the series isn't ended, because they don't want to get hooked and then sit around waiting.
Right. No, that's a really good point, and I'm glad you mentioned that, since we were talking about how authors are told, and it's not necessarily inaccurate, that writing in a series helps to build an audience, easier
Right.
to market than a standalone book. But, and I've mentioned this to authors before about expecting too much of book one and book two. I've heard the term, book one sells, maybe a dozen. Book two, maybe 100. Book three, now people trust you because it's the end of the series. So they'll trust to go back and read.
Yeah, I think that's true.
And
And if you look at series, for example, book one will have a buttload of reviews. I mean, Johnny Lycan in the Anubis Disk, I think, is closing in on 150 reviews. I don't know if it's there.
congratulations.
Book two is sitting at 43 and has been for a while. Or book two, rather, is sitting at 43. And book three is doing very nicely. It's been out a couple of months and it's almost caught book two in terms of reviews. But that kind of makes sense. People read the first book and they're excited, and they read the second book. And even if they're excited, they tend not to take the time to do reviews and other things. So book two, my experience is book two doesn't sell nearly as well as books one and three in a
Gotcha.
trilogy.
Gotcha.
And that may or may not be true, but it feels true. And that's what I'm kind of running on anyway. This entire thing, what I jokingly call my career, is run on my gut. So what the heck?
But it does make sense that people don't want to get invested. I know
Yeah.
for myself with watching television shows, I very rarely watch something when it first comes out. I'm like 2 years behind. If the sort of show is in its third season and it's out there and people are watching it, okay, fine. Now,
Well, and especially in this social media age, I laugh partly because I watched the show and I felt the same way, but certainly not enough to go on a Twitter rampage about it. Netflix had this silly show called Warrior Nun, and it is exactly as silly as you think it is. But it was pretty good, and I was digging it. And I finished season 2, and I was like, "Oh, this is great." And then we found out Netflix wasn't renewing it,
oh,
and the story was never properly resolved. It just kind of, one week the nun drove off, and that was it, right?
oh,
And that's particularly unsatisfying.
right. Well, that's why I won't even start something until I know that we've got a bunch of seasons. So if I get into it, even if it
Sure.
didn't get renewed in season 5, I have something to watch.
I have no problem with a single season of something if
There's an
the
arc,
arc is over and it's done, right? It's like a standalone book.
right?
I,
It's
I
like a long
can,
movie. That's like a long movie.
yeah, I can do that. But what I didn't want to do with Johnny Lycan, which I did do with the Luca Lapou stories, the Acre's Bastard and Acre's Orphans, is I wanted to be very intentional. And then I wanted to let people know that it's okay. This series is done. You can read 1, 2, and 3, and it will be satisfying and a whole thing. And if you want a little more, that's great. I obviously did my job, but I'm not going to traumatize you by leaving you hanging.
I think that's great. And that's why it's great that it doesn't just say book 3. It says, the conclusion or
Yeah.
so this
Oh,
way.
yeah, that was incredibly cynical and mercenary on my part.
Now, you mentioned thinking in terms of sticking the landing. I like that image, sticking the landing. Now, did it ever happen to you, now that you've written several multiples, that you're in book 3 and you got to stick that landing and you realize, oh shoot, I should have left an Easter egg in book 1 having to do with X, or oh darn, if this character only had said blankety blank to this person, it would have made more sense. Does that kind of thing happen?
It didn't a lot.
Okay.
And one of the reasons is book 3 takes place in the exact same universe as book 1.
Okay.
So it's much closer to book one in terms of the characters. In book two, Johnny has this found family of people that, you know, make the book cool. Frankly, the characters are really fun. But he spends a lot of the time in book two in Las Vegas away from all those characters. And there are a couple of big old characters in book two that show up in book three, but there wasn't a lot that had to carry through all three books. By the time I got to book three, I was back in Chicago, and I was back with Bill and Grandma and Megan and
Gotcha.
whatever. So I was, and let's be honest, I'm not writing Gone with the Wind here. They are not long, complicated, incredibly deep world building kind of stories. It's Chicago, and the guy's a werewolf.
Right. There we go.
You know, they are what they are. I'm very proud of these books, but I don't have any illusions about what they are. You know, they are a fun read. If you like picking up a Jack Reacher book and flip, 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 and you read it in one sitting, that's the thing, right? That's what I'm trying to do.
That's my
and
husband's
so,
obsession. So
yeah, and I'm not above. I mean, part of the marketing for this is it's like Jack Reacher with fangs.
I love that. Absolutely.
You know, it has the added bonus of being true, and it's also mildly cynical.
Now, did you used to live in Chicago? Because
Yeah. Yeah, I have lived in, used to change corners of the continent every 15 years. I grew up in a little town just outside Vancouver, and then I spent pretty much a decade in Toronto, and then I moved to LA, and then we moved to Chicago, and now I'm here in Las Vegas.
Does that mean Pensacola is next? I'm trying to.
Well, first of all, never Florida, not going to happen. But the other thing is we love Vegas, and I'm too old for cross-country moves. Like, they are pulling me out of here toes first. I for the first time in my life, I really think I'm somewhere for the duration.
Wow. Wow. That 120 degrees is not doing it for you, huh? That doesn't
You know, we did the cost benefit analysis. One of the reasons that we're here is about 7, 8 years ago, my wife looked at me and said, you know, if you want to keep living with me, it will be somewhere warmer than this hellhole. My poor bride was raised in Miami, and I met her in LA, and then I dragged her to Chicago. And winter and her do not get along. So we decided, you know, heat, snow will take the heat.
Right.
We can become nocturnal and live in air conditioning for 3 months of the year. It's not that big a deal.
Now, what kind of nocturnal things do you do that you're allowed to say on a podcast?
That I am allowed to say, I write, you know, I write. We watch a lot of TVs. We go to the movies a lot.
Outside, like once the sun goes down and you're out there playing pickleball, or you know, you're a late.
No, my pickleball days, I'm in the middle of getting both knees replaced. One knee is done and the other one is happening. So it's not like there's not a lot of reasons for me to go out during the day, quite frankly.
Gotcha. Yes, because it can get hot. It can.
It does. And my highly flammable Celtic Canadian skin was certainly not built for that. But, you know, it's like everywhere else. Right? It's like with winter. I remember talking to people from Buffalo and saying, you know, there's no wall around this city. You can leave at any time. I mean, even God doesn't want to look at Buffalo. He keeps burying it 6 months of the year, and they keep digging out, and they stay there for generations.
They do.
You can make anything work.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. And quite frankly, I'm here in New York, and it's, you know, 90 degrees today. So.
Oh, and that lovely big city humidity, which is so much fun.
You Las Vegas folk, it's a dry.
You know what? It's funny, though. I tell people this and they don't believe me, but I will stand by this. Up to 105 degrees, it's actually tolerable. At 105.1, it becomes unlivable. because there's no humidity.
Right.
And the other thing, and they don't tell you this, is if you come to Vegas, the number one rule of survival is keep a hoodie in the car.
Oh, yeah, because everything is freezing.
It doesn't matter what temperature it is outside. The minute you go indoors, the fridge door has opened and you freeze. And, my poor bride, we go to the movies and it's 1 billion degrees, but she's got her shawl wrapped around her arm because
No,
she's
no,
going to be freezing to death in the theater.
I am so cold whenever I'm, well, summer, any place, but Florida, Vegas, Southern
Yeah.
California, I just walk around shivering all the time.
But
So
that's kind of, in a weird kind of way, he says, making this back about me and my books. That, for example, is something that Johnny discovers when he comes to Vegas, right? He realized Chicago is an objectively good place to be if you're a werewolf, right? Because except for the really hot, humid times, when you walk around in your own fur coat, heat is not a blessing. And the cold doesn't really bother you. So Chicago is a much better place for Johnny than Vegas.
absolutely, absolutely. At least 6 months out of the year, you're wearing a fur coat. It works.
Indeed.
So we finished this series. We're writing some short stories. No, nothing is tantalizing enough to dip in with another.
I did a really deep dive on a piece of history that fascinates me. And I did a really deep dive on the research, which I tend to do. And the story just isn't there. I don't think that's going to be the next one. I'm pretty sure that the next one will be historical fiction. If I was the over under on it being something to do with the French Foreign Legion
Okay.
is, I would take the over on that. But I haven't quite got
Okay.
the
I'm glad
exact
you
story
said
yet.
that this other avenue that you were considering just didn't have enough, because I meet too many writers who are up against a brick wall and they think the problem is writer's block. And often I will try to say, this is not writer's block. This is not the book you should be writing, whether because it's not a book worth writing or it's not the book for you to be writing right now.
Yeah.
And you know, to back up and go in a different direction. Too many people, when they're in a car, even if they lose the road, they just keep going forward, and they should really.
It's funny. I don't know I'd have made that decision several years ago. But I am, all appearances to the contrary, smarter now than I was then. What I've got, this particular instance, it's a fascinating incident.
Mhm.
What happens is fascinating, but there isn't a compelling character. And the cool part of the story doesn't reach a conclusion that's worthy of a book.
Mhm.
And so what I've got is some really interesting stuff happens. But there isn't a character that you would care about. And the conclusion is kind of lame.
Okay.
And so maybe not now.
Well, good for you for discerning that, because I think too many people don't. And
Well,
the problem is them, that they're just not writing a good enough book. But if the story's not there.
I hope that I have gotten smarter as I went. It's funny, my very first novel was a standalone and it was based on a single character. And I couldn't have even attempted a series right out of the gate. I had to do a standalone book.
Mm.
And the subject was perfect. It was a person, Byron de Prorock, had a fascinating period of his life, and then he died. Perfect, right? I don't have to worry about a sequel. It's not a spoiler alert. He lived in 1926. It's highly unlikely he's still around. Although, cool writer thing, I did hear from his granddaughter, who thanked me for writing about her grandfather. So that
Really?
was cool.
Oh, that is cool.
Um, but then when I wrote Acre's Bastard, and people said, wow, I like this better than the first book. And I kind of got insulted. I was like, what do you mean you didn't like the first book? And then I kind of went, wait a minute, I'm supposed to be getting better at this. You know, there is something to maturity that helps you put things in perspective.
Absolutely. I will use the example of Dan Brown. People think he hit it out of the park with his first book. That was like his third or fifth book.
Yeah.
And then I have no doubt that he went back now that he was a better writer. He went forward and wrote some more, but he also went back because now people were looking at his backlist. And I'm sure that some serious editing went into things because he was a more mature writer. Gets it.
Well, I'm doing that now. Like I say, I'm playing with this idea of an anthology, and I don't know if I'm going to do it or not. But I look at stories, even stories that were published and I was very proud of in 2017, 2018, whatever. And I go, oh, you know, if this is going in a book, this sucker needs some work.
Yeah. Yeah, but at the time you thought it was fabulous. You know,
Yeah, absolutely.
we all thought we were fabulous. Even me and my lousy golf game. You know, we all think we're good that first time. And that's a whole lot of maturity to realize that your first book is not this, you know, Nobel Prize winning thing.
Unless it is, and then you're screwed.
Okay, well,
There's nowhere to go.
in which case, yeah, those people are just totally screwed. You know, if you're gonna peak right that, then just, you know, go under a rock or something.
You know, my nightmare is being Harper Lee.
It's a heck of a
You know, and even her second novel wasn't really her second novel. It was the first novel that they just put out in the world. So
exactly. Well, tell me about your books as far as who I should be buying these for, because that really helps me when I'm shopping. So, you mentioned what kind of a person I might want to buy the Werewolf PI series for. Describe your.
you know, I love your tone of voice on that, because depending on how you ask that question, it could be really insulting.
Really?
Like, well, what kind of person would like this book is a perfectly legitimate question. What kind of person would like this book is the exact same words, very different question.
Hey, you know me way too well for that.
So
My shopping list, like,
yes, for the shopping list,
you know, you
Werewolf Detective.
Clive Cussler, you know, kind of a.
Yeah, I think that if you are willing to suspend belief and go with the whole werewolf function, right. I think people that like Spencer for Hire, people that like Reacher, will get the humor and like the character, because Johnny's a blue collar, kind of a mook of a guy, fish out of water. If you read urban fantasy and you read the Sookie Stackhouse novels and you read the Dresden Files, one of the kindest and cruelest things somebody said about the series was that it was like methadone for Dresden fans, that it will hold you over till your next fix.
Love that.
Which is kind of damning with faint praise, but it ain't wrong.
It's a definite two-edged kind of a thing.
If you like Dresden Files, if you like the Sookie Stackhouse novels, if you enjoy that kind of thing, you will totally dig Johnny.
Gotcha. Now I'm on your website here, which
Uh-oh.
I'm gonna because I love these comparisons here. For your historical here, Kipling's Kim set in the Crusades, brilliant characters and exciting action. Was that your tie-in with Kipling, or was that somebody who made that?
No, that was me. I mean, okay, again, we're getting back to listen up, authors, kids, come here. Gather around. Let your Uncle Wayne tell you something.
Love this.
The most important thing you can do when you're launching a book is your comp titles. I
Yep.
mean, it's, for you, it's who should I buy this
Yep.
for
Yep.
on my shopping list?
Comp title.
But it's the comp titles. It's like, who reads this book in marketing? Who is your avatar? Which is
Exactly. Yeah.
an annoying, weaselly way to look at it. But let's see. He's 11 years old. He's half European, half Arab. He's caught up in a war. He's caught up in the Crusades. He gets turned into a spy. It's Kim.
Mhm.
If you read that story, as it was me growing up, one of my favorite books, it's maybe a little too close if you want to be technical, but if you like that, you'll like this.
Yeah.
And the comp titles are so important to your books.
Yeah.
And the minute somebody says, well, anybody can enjoy this book, no, they can't.
No, absolutely. And that's why I ask, like I said, who should I be buying this for? It really is important for people to just to get that. And like you said, with comp titles, I talk about how book covers, and you're nailing yours, that they have to appeal to the right reader. If yours looked like the cover of, some sexy thing with a half naked guy with biceps, wrong audience.
Well, but this is part of, there's a whole industry around book covers.
Oh yeah.
And it makes me crazy that a lot of urban fantasy, which is aimed at youngish women, the shapeshifter, king of the shapeshifters, and this guy turns into a wolf, but there isn't like a body hair on him, like he waxes 28 days a month, right? It's like, that doesn't strike me as particularly relevant.
But that's what, like you said, it's also sales.
At the end of the day, you can write the book, and there is satisfaction in writing a book and finishing a book, but you kind of want people to read it too. I mean, even if you're not making money off of it, like money off of it, you want it in people's hands. I mean, I was at a bookstore launching last Witchfinder, and somebody had just read Count of the Sahara, which is my first novel, and he wanted to geek out on it. He's standing there at my table and he's like geeking out on the book. And I wrote that book 10 years ago. I'm desperately trying. I don't think I've read it since the year it came out, right? And I'm trying to remember the details, and he's doing a deep dive.
Wow.
And
Wow.
it's so cool, and it's so rewarding.
Absolutely. And I want to share that one with our viewers also. The Count of the Sahara. Historical fiction at its best. Indiana Jones meets my favorite year. That's a great.
Which is not, I did not write that, but it was perfect.
Okay.
I did not. That came from an Amazon review.
Look at that. Look at that. But I definitely want our listeners to hear this range. We have some serious range going, which really makes me wonder what's coming out next.
You and me both, lady. I've got literary ADD. I mean, I can only keep on track with one thing for so long.
I get that. Well, for all of our listeners out there who also might have literary ADD and want a little bit of everything, and want to follow a fabulous writer, you'll definitely want to go to Wayne's website, wayneturmel.com. Sign up. He's got a sign up list there. I know he's got a newsletter going. He'll keep you up on what's going on. Catch up on all these books. The Werewolf PI now is finished. Well, it's finished as of, today at this moment, until Wayne tells me otherwise. But for the moment, you will at least get a satisfying conclusion. So you don't have to worry that he's leaving you high and dry there. But definitely sign up and get some new stuff here.
What she said.
What I said.
Everything that she just said. Perfect. Yes, thank you.
And do me a favor, Wayne. Send me a short story. I want to read something totally different from you. Totally different. That's what I want next.
Okay. Any particular theme or genre?
Surprise me.
Like I say, don't invite me to a party. I just might show up.
Okay, no, I'm loving this. Surprise me. Send me something
Okay.
totally different. And for our listeners, make sure you follow Wayne because you might be having a party, then you might show up. So Wayne, always a pleasure, and I can't wait to read what you're going to send me next.
Thank you, Miss Stephanie.
You're so very welcome. Thanks for joining me.